The sky was gray that morning, the kind that makes you think the world knows something you don't. The service started at 10, but it didn't matter what time it was because I was the only one there. Just me, standing beside a closed casket with my son's name carved into brass, surrounded by rows of empty chairs. I'd spent 12 years in the army. I'd been to memorials that could break a soldier's heart, ceremonies for men blown apart overseas. Yet none of them ever felt as empty as this. My son Mason was supposed to have people, family, friends, hell, at least his grandparents. But there was no one, just a funeral director trying not to look guilty for charging full price for an audience of one. He kept glancing at me, like he expected me to fall apart. I didn't, not because I wasn't sad. I'd cried all the tears I had weeks before, alone in a hospital hallway when the doctor came out shaking his head. After that, grief turned into something quieter, something that sits in your gut and waits. The priest started reading from a little black book, the usual lines about peace and eternal rest. His voice echoed in the chapel like it was bouncing off ghosts. Mason's picture sat on an easel beside the casket, a photo from his graduation. 18 years old, hair too long, pretending to hate the camera, but smiling anyway. That smile used to drive me nuts. Now I'd give anything to see it again. Halfway through the service, my phone buzzed. I should have ignored it. But grief makes you stupid. And I looked. A text from my mother. Something came up. We can't make it, sweetie. Tell the pastor we're praying from home. Praying from home. Right. I pictured her in her favorite blue dress, probably already on her way to my sister Lily's house. There was supposed to be some small gathering there. A birthday, a little celebration, nothing important, she said. But apparently, it was important enough to skip burying her grandson. I stared at that text until the words blurred. The priest kept talking. The funeral director adjusted his tie. Outside, the wind rattled the chapel doors. I realized I hadn't blinked in maybe a full minute. When it was over, I followed the casket out to the cemetery. The air was sharp, biting cold, like the kind that cuts straight through your coat. I watched them lower Mason into the ground. The sound of dirt hitting wood is something you don't forget. It's dull, final, too real. The director asked if I wanted a moment alone. I almost laughed. The whole damn day had been a moment alone. Back home, everything looked the same. The mail was stacked on the counter, the kitchen clock still ticking like nothing happened. Mason's shoes were still by the door. His cereal box still sat half empty on the counter. I stood there for a long time, staring at it all, and realized that death doesn't actually stop the world, it just removes you from the version that used to make sense. I made coffee I didn't drink, sat on the couch, and opened my phone again. I shouldn't have done it, but I did. Lily's Instagram was public, of course. She'd posted 5 minutes before the funeral started. A photo of her, mom, dad, and a group of smiling faces around a cake. Caption: Family first. So grateful for today. Ollie. Family first. That one nearly made me throw the phone across the room. My father stood in the background of that photo, raising a glass. His hand was steady. You'd never guess he'd just lost his only grandson. I scrolled through the comments. You all look amazing. Such a beautiful family. God bless. And something inside me burned. Not loud, not wild, just steady, controlled. The way I used to feel before a deployment, when I knew I was about to walk into a situation that demanded absolute calm. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Mason's photo and a glass of bourbon. The same one he'd bought me last Father's Day because, according to him, I deserved something fancier than beer. He'd saved up for it. It tasted like smoke and guilt now. I stared at the bottle, at the photo, at the pile of bills beside me. My parents had helped with those bills once. Back when Mason was little, when things were tight and I was stationed overseas. They'd played the role of doting grandparents, Christmas gifts, birthday cards, phone calls that always ended with, "We're proud of you." I used to believe that. When I finally called my mother later that night, she answered on the second ring, her voice bright like she was expecting someone else. "Oh, Danny, we were just talking about you." "Really?" I said, my voice flat. "Before or after the cake?" There was silence. Then that careful tone she used when she knew she'd screwed up but didn't want to admit it. "Honey, please don't start. You know how emotional these things are for me. I couldn't handle seeing him like that." "Yeah," I said. So you went to a party instead. It wasn't a party, she snapped. It was Lily's event, and people were counting on us. I couldn't just cancel last minute. People were counting on you? I repeated. He was counting on you. There was nothing but breathing on the other end. Slow, shallow, like she was deciding whether to hang up or cry. Then she said the thing that made me realize there was no coming back from this. You're being dramatic, Danielle. You always make everything about you. That was it. That one sentence. After that, whatever was left between us, the trust, the history, the benefit of the doubt, died right along with Mason. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just said, "Good night, Mom," and hung up. For the first time since I'd come home from the hospital, I slept. Not well, but deep enough that I dreamed. Mason was there, standing on the porch, grinning like he used to when he'd surprise me with breakfast. I woke up before he said a word. The morning light came through the blinds, thin and sharp. I walked into the kitchen, poured coffee, and saw the note I'd scribbled on a napkin the night before. Call lawyer, change will. I didn't even remember writing it, but I knew exactly what it meant. Because if I'd learned anything in the army, it's that betrayal isn't always a bullet. Sometimes it's just silence at a funeral. And sometimes, silence deserves an answer. I looked at Mason's photo again and said out loud, "Okay, kid, let's get this done." Then I put on my uniform jacket, not for duty, just for strength, and grabbed my keys. There were things to take care of. The kind of things that didn't require tears or sympathy, just clarity. The cold hit harder once I stepped outside. The air smelled like wet soil and gasoline, that strange mix you only notice when your mind's too loud. I sat in my truck for a minute before starting the engine. The seat still had crumbs from Mason's last fast food run. He'd always leave the wrappers tucked in the door pocket like I wouldn't notice. I used to nag him for that. Now I couldn't even bring myself to move them. I drove with the radio off. The silence in that cab was thicker than anything I'd felt overseas. You'd think a woman who's spent years in uniform would know how to handle loneliness. Turns out military training doesn't prepare you for being ignored by your own family. At home, I poured coffee again, pretending that normal still existed. I opened the kitchen drawer, where I kept my army files, deployment letters, commendations, Mason's birth certificate. My lawyer's business card was tucked under an old photo of me and my platoon. Everyone in that picture was either retired, divorced, or dead. I'd outlasted all of them, yet somehow I was the one who felt buried. By noon, I had Thomas Reynolds, my attorney, on the phone. He'd handled my affairs before, including the small trust fund I'd set aside for Mason's college, the same one that now sat untouched. "Danny," he said, his voice careful, "I heard about Mason. I'm sorry." "Thanks," I replied. "Listen, I need to make changes to my will. Urgently." He hesitated. "Of course. Should I ask what kind of changes?" "I want to remove 2 people." He didn't have to ask who. The silence on the line said enough. "Understood," he said softly. "Come in tomorrow. We'll take care of it." When I hung up, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the family photo wall. My parents' faces looked down at me from vacations, birthdays, all those happy moments we used to pretend were real. I grabbed a step stool and took one frame down the photo from Mason's 8th birthday. He'd been holding a toy plane, the same model I'd flown during my 2nd tour. My dad was behind him, smiling proudly. I flipped the frame over and ripped out the photo. That night, I dreamed of the last phone call Mason ever made. His voice had been weak, but he'd still tried to make me laugh. "Mom," he'd said, "don't freak out, but I kind of forgot to water the cactus again. I told him I'd take care of it when I got back from base. I didn't." The cactus was dead now, sitting on the kitchen windowsill like proof of everything I didn't fix in time. The next morning, I put on my army jacket again. Not the dress uniform, just the field one. The patches were worn, the sleeves faded, but it gave me a kind of armor. I drove to Thomas's office in town. He was waiting, already standing by the window when I walked in. "Danny," he said, pulling out the chair for me. "You sure about this?" "Completely," I said. "If my parents and sister can't stand by family when it matters, they don't get to profit off what's left of it." He nodded, pulling out a stack of papers. "All right then. Who do you want the estate to go to instead?" I hesitated for a second before saying it. "Mason's friend Tyler. The kid's 19. He used to mow the lawn for us. He was there every week, even when Mason got sick. Never asked for money, just wanted to help. He's the closest thing Mason had to a brother. Thomas looked at me for a moment, then said quietly, "That's a good choice." We spent the next hour going over every line: property, accounts, the cabin upstate my father always claimed was his retirement spot. I signed everything, my hands steady. When we were done, Thomas leaned back. "You know, Danny, I've seen people disinherit family before. Usually they regret it later." "I won't," I said. "Regret implies you think someone deserves another chance." On the way home, I stopped at the cemetery. The ground was still fresh where they'd buried Mason. The little plaque with his name had already started to rust at the corners. I crouched down and brushed some dirt off the edge. "I handled the paperwork," I said quietly. "It's done." The wind picked up, sharp and cutting. Somewhere behind me, a church bell rang noon. I stood there until the sound faded, then turned back toward the truck. When I got home, the voicemail light on my phone was blinking. I pressed play. It was my sister. "Danny, I heard you called the lawyer. Mom's really upset. She says you're overreacting. Can we just talk?" I deleted it halfway through. By evening, the house felt colder than usual. I sat at the table again, same spot as before, same glass of bourbon. The smell of oak and smoke filled the room. I didn't drink it. I just let it sit there, a reminder that I could if I wanted to. The doorbell rang around 7. For a second, I thought about ignoring it. Then I opened the door. My father was standing there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes tired. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without answering. He looked around the living room like it was a museum of bad memories. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "You could say that." He cleared his throat. "Your mother's a mess. She didn't mean to upset you." "She's had 70 years to figure out how not to upset me," I said. "Danny, please. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," I said. "You both made a choice." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, the way he used to when he was about to lose an argument. "I didn't know she'd post that picture. It was Lily's idea. I just wanted to make her happy." "Your daughter was burying her son and you wanted to make someone else happy," I said flatly. He looked at me then, really looked. "You sound just like your mother." That one landed harder than it should have. I crossed my arms, forcing myself not to react. He sighed, stepping toward the door. "We're not bad people, Danny. We just didn't know how to handle it." "Yeah," I said. "That's kind of the problem." He paused on the porch. "I hope one day you'll understand." "I already do," I said, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. Later that night, I went into Mason's room. The smell of him still lingered: detergent, cheap cologne, and something sweet I couldn't name. His posters were still up, his guitar leaning against the wall, one string broken. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, I realized how small the room was, how much space he'd filled just by existing. I picked up his notebook from the desk. Inside were sketches of cars, half-finished song lyrics, and one line scrawled across the last page: "Don't wait for people who wouldn't wait for you." I didn't know when he wrote it, but it felt like he'd left it for me. I sat there until the clock hit midnight. The house was silent again, no phone calls, no excuses, no noise. Just quiet, and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I finally stood, walked back to the living room, and turned off every light. The moonlight through the window landed on the lawyer's envelope on the counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The decision was already sealed in me, steady and unshakable. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something that almost resembled calm. The morning started too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it presses down. I made coffee, black, and watched it steam for a few seconds before I realized I hadn't even turned on a light. The lawyer's envelope still sat on the counter where I'd left it, unopened but heavy, like it could smell guilt. I grabbed it, tossed it into my bag, and left. The road into town was half empty, the kind of slow weekday traffic that makes you feel invisible. I didn't turn on music. Didn't need to. My thoughts were loud enough. The law office was tucked between a florist and a dental clinic, both of which smelled better than the air inside. Thomas greeted me with a half smile, the kind people give when they're about to tell you something unpleasant but don't want to seem cruel. "I went ahead and drafted the amendments," he said, motioning for me to sit. His office looked exactly like it always had. Same wooden blinds, same old clock ticking too loud, same framed photo of his golden retriever wearing a tie. He handed me the papers. The first page had my name in bold at the top. Danielle Collins. The name felt foreign suddenly, like it belonged to someone who hadn't just buried a child. I flipped through the pages, scanning the legal jargon words like revocation, beneficiary, transfer of title. Each one felt clinical, precise, emotionless. The kind of language that turned heartbreak into logistics. Thomas pointed at a section near the bottom. Here's where we redirect the estate. You wanted everything to go to Tyler Henderson? I nodded. That's right. And nothing to your parents or sister. That's right too. He gave me a look professional, not judgmental, but close enough. You're sure about this? Once this is filed, it's hard to reverse. I'm sure, I said. Dead sure. He chuckled quietly at the dark humor, but didn't push further. All right then. Sign here and here. The pen felt too light for what I was doing. My signature came out steady, no hesitation. I'd signed deployment papers with more nerves. When we finished, Thomas said, "For what it's worth, Danny, I think you're doing the right thing. People forget the will isn't just about money, it's about who you trust to remember you correctly." Exactly, I said, and they already failed that test. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light and caught sight of a family in the car beside me. A woman about my age in the passenger seat, laughing at something her husband said. 2 kids in the back, fighting over a snack. It was such a normal scene that it hurt to look at. By the time I got home, the sky had turned that dull kind of blue that looks tired. I dropped my bag on the counter and noticed a voicemail light blinking again. I almost didn't check, but I did. It was Lily this time, again. "Mom's been crying all morning," she said, her tone dripping with practiced concern. "Dad's worried you're losing it. Can we please just talk about this? You're taking things too far." I deleted it before she finished. Instead, I pulled out Mason's old photo albums. Half the pages were filled with snapshots of holidays and cookouts, faces smiling, arms around each other, pretending everything was fine. The older the photos got, the more I saw the cracks. My parents were always there, but never present. My sister always took up more space than the room allowed, every frame tilted toward her like gravity was playing favorites. I reached the last few pages and found a picture of Mason fishing with my dad. Mason couldn't have been older than 8. My father had his hand on Mason's shoulder, showing him how to cast the line. The picture looked perfect, 2 generations, one quiet afternoon, but the memory behind it wasn't. That day, I'd been on call, stuck at base. My father had called me later that night, bragging about the man-to-man talk they'd had. When Mason came home, he didn't say much, just mumbled that Grandpa thought, military life ruins families. I'd brushed it off then. Now it replayed in my head with new meaning. I closed the album. The next morning, I got an email from Thomas confirming the paperwork had been filed. It felt final, but not in a way that hurt. More like cutting off a dead branch. Necessary. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Real cleaning, the kind you do when you're trying not to think. I found old bills, unopened mail, and Mason's report cards. Straight A's mostly. 1 C in physics. He'd hated that class. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of a life that ended too soon, and realized something simple. My parents never asked to see any of it. Not once. Around 5, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Lily. No warning, no call. Just her SUV in the driveway and her perfume already in the air before she even knocked. She didn't wait for me to open the door, just walked in like the place belonged to her. "Danny," she started. "This has gone too far." Make your point," I said, crossing my arms. She sighed, like she was the one being wronged. "You can't just erase family because you're angry. That's not how love works." I let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "Love? You mean the kind that shows up for brunch but not a funeral?" "Don't do this," she said. "Mom couldn't handle it. Dad didn't want to make it worse." "They made it worse by pretending Mason didn't exist," I said. She looked around the house, eyes landing on the photos still on the table. "You're not the only one who lost him." "Really?" I asked. "Where were you when I was sitting alone next to his casket?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me with that look she'd perfected her whole life, the one that said, "You're the difficult one." Finally, she said, "You've changed." I nodded. Good. She left without another word. That night, I stood by the kitchen window, watching her car taillights disappear down the street. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness, from adrenaline. I wasn't used to confrontation outside of combat, but this one felt personal in a way bullets never could. The house was silent again. I turned off the lights, walked down the hall, and stopped by Mason's room. The moonlight hit the broken guitar string, glinting like silver wire. I sat on his bed and took out my phone. My inbox had one unread message from Tyler. "Hey, Miss Collins, I stopped by the cemetery today. Put some fresh flowers. Hope that's okay." It was more than okay. It was everything. I typed back, "Thank you, Tyler. That means a lot." I didn't send anything else. No explanation, no small talk. Just that. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the windows. I looked at the framed flag folded neatly on Mason's desk, the one given at his burial. Beneath it was a medal I'd earned years before for outstanding leadership. I laughed under my breath. Funny thing about leadership, it means nothing if you keep leading the wrong people. The clock in the hallway ticked steady, and I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to call anymore. The phone could stay silent. I had what I needed. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of rain. It hadn't started yet, but you could feel it coming. The air felt charged, like the sky was holding its breath. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the clouds move in. My phone buzzed once. A text from my father. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. He didn't deserve an answer yet. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove out to the base. Technically, I was still on leave, but the guards waved me through without question. Once a soldier, always a soldier, they see the posture, the uniform jacket, and they know better than to ask. The hangar smelled like oil and metal, familiar and grounding. I found Sergeant Miller inside, the same guy I'd trained with 10 years ago, before he left for private security work. He looked older, rounder in the face, but his handshake still had that bone-crushing confidence. "Danny Collins," he said, grinning. "Back from the land of the living dead, huh?" "Something like that," I said. He studied me for a moment, then his grin faded. "I heard about Mason. I'm sorry." I nodded. "Thanks. Guess that news travels fast." "Word like that always does," he said quietly. "You holding up?" I gave a half shrug. "Depends on the day." He didn't push it, just handed me a folder. "Your service file. You left a few things in storage, figured you'd want them back." Inside were photos, commendation letters, and a stack of paperwork I'd long forgotten. But what caught my eye was a small envelope labeled Retirement Option Plan, Family Beneficiaries. I'd signed it years ago, back when I thought family meant something solid. The line for secondary beneficiary was still blank. I smiled a little. Guess I'd always known, deep down, who not to trust. I thanked Miller, told him I'd handle it, and left before the rain started. On the drive home, the first drops hit the windshield, small and sharp. Back in town, I stopped by the grocery store. Milk, bread, the kind of small routine that reminds you the world keeps moving. Near the checkout, I saw my mother. She was standing by the floral section, talking loudly to the clerk, pretending not to see me. I almost walked past. Almost. But something in me didn't want to give her that comfort. I walked straight up, basket in hand. "Buying flowers?" I asked. She flinched a little, but recovered fast. "Danielle, I didn't see you there." "Yeah?" I said. "That seems to be a pattern." The clerk glanced between us like he'd stumbled into a family hostage situation. My mother smiled stiffly. "These are for the church," she said. "We're decorating for the community luncheon." I looked at the bouquet, bright yellow lilies. Mason had hated lilies, said they smelled like hospitals. "Nice," I said. "Guess some people get flowers." "One. Don't do this here," she said under her breath. "Do what?" I asked. "Acknowledge reality?" She straightened her shoulders. "You're angry. I understand that. But you can't keep punishing everyone." "Everyone?" I repeated. "Who's everyone, Mom? You mean you and Lily?" She looked away, pretending to rearrange the bouquet. "Your father's worried about you. We all are." Right, I said. Because nothing says love like skipping a funeral and then staging concern afterward. Oi. Her lips tightened. You're being cruel. No, I said calmly. I'm being honest. There's a difference. I set my basket down, turned, and walked out. The rain hit harder now, soaking my jacket by the time I got to the truck. I sat there, dripping, staring at the steering wheel. My hands were steady. That's how I knew I wasn't just mad anymore. I was done. When I got home, I dropped the groceries on the counter and turned on the TV local news, just noise. But instead of hearing the anchor, I caught my reflection in the dark window. The same face my mother used to say was too serious for a girl. The same eyes Mason had inherited. I turned off the TV. The phone rang again around 7. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. It was my father. Your mother says you caused a scene at the store. Good, I said. Danny, he sighed. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? Burning bridges, he said. Family doesn't last if you keep cutting people out. I leaned against the counter. You're right. Family doesn't last when people treat it like a convenience. That's not fair, he said. You're right again, I said. It's not fair. None of this is. Mason deserved better than you, than her, than all of this. His voice cracked slightly. We made mistakes. No, I said. You made choices. He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was small. I miss him too. No. Then you should have shown up, I said, and hung up. The silence afterward felt different this time. Not heavy, not hollow, just quiet. The next morning, Tyler stopped by unannounced. He knocked lightly, then stepped back like he wasn't sure if I'd answer. He was holding a small box. Hey, he said awkwardly. I found this in my car. Mason left it there one day after we hung out. Thought you'd want it. Inside the box was a keychain. Simple metal, scratched up, with a little tag that read home base. I turned it over in my hand. He made it, Tyler said. Said he was going to give it to you when you came back from duty. I swallowed hard. Thank you. He nodded. You okay? Not really, I said. But I'm here. He hesitated at the door. I know it's not my place, but Mason talked about you a lot. He was proud of you, you know. That one hit harder than I expected. He was a good kid, I said quietly. Yeah, Tyler said. He was. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at that keychain. Home base. Mason had always called the house that, even when he was little. No matter where we go, he'd say, we always come back to home base. I realized then that home wasn't supposed to be a building. It was supposed to be people, and mine had left me standing in the rain. That evening, the sky cleared. I stepped outside, the air still damp but lighter. Across the street, I could hear laughter my neighbors, a young couple with a toddler. The sound was soft, almost fragile, but real. I went back inside, opened the drawer where I kept my medals, and took one out. The Army Commendation Medal. I'd earned it for leading my unit through a search and rescue under fire. I remembered every second of that mission how fear makes people either collapse or rise, and how you learn exactly who you can trust when things go wrong. That's when it clicked. My parents, my sister, they hadn't collapsed. They'd walked away, chosen comfort over decency. I set the medal down next to Mason's keychain. 2 pieces of metal. 2 reminders of who I used to be and who I was becoming again. As the night stretched on, I made a decision. No more texts. No more explanations. No more defending my pain to people who hadn't earned the right to witness it. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and opened a blank page in my notebook. The header I wrote was simple: family inventory. Then I started listing, not people but values. Things I'd give, things I'd take back. By the time I put the pen down, I'd filled half the page. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was clarity. And clarity, I'd learned, was the first step toward freedom. By morning, the clouds had cleared, leaving the kind of pale blue sky that looks like it's daring you to feel better. I didn't. I sat on the couch with a mug of coffee gone cold, scrolling through nothing on my phone. Notifications, news, junk. I was about to toss the phone aside when a new message popped up from Tyler again. It wasn't a text this time. It was a video link. No caption, just a message. You should see this. I hesitated before opening it. The thumbnail showed Mason sitting on his bed, grinning at the camera. My heart stopped for half a beat. I clicked play. He was holding his phone like he was vlogging. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice soft but teasing. "If you're watching this, you probably snooped through my files again." He laughed. That stupid little laugh that always made me want to hug him and scold him at the same time. "Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks. For everything. Even when I acted like I didn't care, I did. You're kind of a badass, you know that?" I smiled through the sting in my throat. He looked healthy in the video, bright eyes, energy in his face. Then his tone shifted. "I know you worry too much. I get it. But if anything ever happens, don't let Grandma and Grandpa guilt you. They mean well, but they live in their own world. Lily, too. She's never really understood you." He sighed. "You always told me actions matter more than words. Remember that, okay? Don't let anyone make you feel small." End quote. The screen went black for a second before he added, "Oh, and check the box under my bed. I hid something there." The video ended. I sat there, staring at the screen, replaying his words like they were a map I'd missed. I went straight to his room. The air still carried that faint scent of him detergent and something like vanilla. I knelt down and pulled the box from under the bed. Inside were a few random things: a baseball glove, a stack of CDs, and a small flash drive taped to the lid. I took it to the kitchen, plugged it into my laptop, and waited. The folder opened instantly. Dozens of photos and short clips: Mason and Tyler working on his car, Mason cooking a disaster of a breakfast, Mason laughing into the camera. Then, one video labeled simply, "Truth." I clicked. The camera was shaky, set on a desk. Mason was sitting across from my parents at Lily's dining table. My mother looked annoyed. My father looked tired. Lily was on her phone. Mason was trying to talk. "I'm serious," he said. "I need your help. The hospital bills, Mom's already drained her savings. I don't want her worrying about money on top of everything else." My mother sighed. "Mason, honey, your mom made her choices. We've helped enough." Lily didn't even look up. "She's got military insurance, doesn't she? She'll figure it out." Mason's face fell. "She's working overtime and barely sleeping. She's been covering for my treatments herself." "I just thought—" "You thought wrong," my father interrupted. "Your mother's tough. She'll manage." The silence after that felt longer than the video itself. Mason finally nodded, stood up, and said quietly, "Yeah, she always does." The video ended, and I realized my hands were shaking. I closed the laptop and just sat there, the kitchen clock ticking like it was mocking me. That video wasn't revenge, it was evidence. Proof that the people who'd raised me had already decided who mattered and who didn't. I poured myself a drink, not out of habit but out of ritual. Bourbon again. It burned, but I didn't care. I stared at Mason's face on the pause screen, his expression frozen mid-sentence, and felt something in me snap into focus. The next morning, I made a call to a reporter I knew from years ago, a guy named Steve Kendall. We'd met when I came home from deployment and spoke at a veterans event. He'd covered my unit's story once, and he'd always said, "If you ever have a story of your own, call me." He answered on the second ring. "Danielle Collins. Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "I've got something," I said. "Something about family, hypocrisy, and what happens when people forget what decency looks like." He laughed softly. "You always did know how to pitch. What's the angle?" "The truth," I said. "Just the truth." He paused. "You want to go public?" "Not about Mason," I said quickly. "This isn't about pity. It's about accountability. People love preaching family values until you ask them to live by them." There was another pause. "Send me what you've got," he said finally. I sent him the video. No commentary, no notes, just the file. An hour later, he called back. "Jesus, Danny, that's heavy. You sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure." "All right," he said. "I'll run a piece anonymous source. Edited names. But people are going to recognize it. You ready for that?" I've been ready since the funeral. That evening, I sat on the porch with the TV news playing inside. The headline flashed across the screen. "When family fails, a soldier mother's story of silence and betrayal." They blurred the faces, changed the names, but anyone who knew us would know. My parents would know. Lily would definitely know. The video clip played for maybe 15 seconds. Just Mason's voice saying, "She's working overtime and barely sleeping." That was all it took. The internet did the rest. I didn't check social media that night, but I didn't have to. The next morning, my phone was full missed calls, texts, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. A few from old army friends. "Damn, Danny. Respect." And then there were the voicemails from my family. Mom crying, "How could you humiliate us like this?" Dad, quiet. "You didn't have to do that, kiddo." Lily, furious. "You think you're some kind of hero now?" I listened to each one once, then deleted them all. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Not happy, not even relieved, just clean, like breathing in cold air after being underwater too long. By afternoon, Steve called again. "Your story's blowing up," he said. "People are calling it a modern parable. You started something, Danny." "When?" "Good," I said. "About time someone did." He laughed. "You don't sound surprised." "I'm not," I said. "I've seen worse wars than this. At least this one's honest." After we hung up, I went out to the garden. The soil was damp from yesterday's rain. Mason's cactus sat by the fence where I'd moved it. Dead or not, I decided it deserved a proper place. I dug a small hole, set the pot in the ground, and whispered, "You were right, kid. Actions matter more than words." The wind picked up, gentle but sure, brushing through the trees like applause. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the third day, the story had spread across half the state. The local paper picked it up from the news site. Then the Veterans newsletter ran it with the headline, "The Price of Silence." My inbox filled with messages from strangers, mothers, soldiers, people who said they'd been through the same kind of betrayal. They thanked me for saying what they couldn't. But not everyone was grateful. By Wednesday, Lily's photography studio, the one she'd built her perfect little world around, was swarmed with bad reviews and cancellations. Her social media accounts were locked down, her website went dark, and the family's reputation in Maple Ridge turned from respected to rotten overnight. I didn't plan it that way. I hadn't asked for it. But I also wasn't sorry. That morning, I was sitting on the porch sipping coffee that had gone cold again when a car pulled into the driveway. The silver Lexus gave it away before the driver even stepped out. Lily. She came out wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy, like she thought hiding behind tinted glass would make her less recognizable. Her hair was perfect, always was, but her voice cracked the second she spoke. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't even get up. "Morning to you too." "That. Don't play dumb," she snapped, slamming her car door. "You gave that video to the press. You destroyed me." I took a slow sip, more for effect than thirst. "Destroyed? No. Exposed, maybe?" She laughed, but it came out sharp and shaky. "Do you know how much I've lost? Sponsors, clients gone. My reputation ruined. Everyone's calling me heartless." I tilted my head. "Well, if the shoe fits." She tore off her sunglasses and glared at me. "You think you're better than us because you wear a uniform and cry over your dead son? You've always acted like you're above the rest of us. Newsflash, Danny, you're not special. You're just mean." Her words hit like dull stones. No power, just noise. I stood up slowly, every inch of me calm. "You want to talk about mean? You threw a party while I buried my child." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence hung thick between us until she said quietly, "Mom said you'd twist things like this." "Then you should stop taking advice from people who skipped funerals," I said. She stared at me, eyes glassy, voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. "That's the problem with people like you. You never mean for things to go that far. You just don't stop them either." Her lip quivered, and for a second, I almost felt bad. But then I remembered that video, the way she looked bored while Mason begged for help and the pity vanished. She turned away, walking back to her car. Before she got in, she said, "You've made your point, congratulations. You're alone." I smiled. "I've been alone for a long time, Lily. This just made it official." When her car disappeared down the road, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the driveway. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of it all, not regret, just gravity. Later that afternoon, my dad showed up. He didn't knock. He just stood on the porch, hat in hand, like he was trying to look smaller than usual. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. I nodded toward the chair across from me. He sat down carefully, the way men do when they're afraid of breaking something invisible. "You really did a number on us," he said. "You did it yourselves," I said simply. He sighed. "Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Maybe she should have cried at the cemetery." He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand, she's fragile." I leaned forward. "And Mason wasn't? And me? We're what, tougher by default?" He didn't answer, just stared at his hands. "I wish you hadn't gone to the media. I wish you'd gone to the funeral," I said. He looked up, eyes tired. "This is what you wanted, huh? Revenge?" I shook my head. "No, I wanted accountability. Revenge just happened to look the same." He exhaled slowly, standing to leave. "You know," he said, "you've got your mother's temper." "Good," I said. "Maybe I'll burn the right things with it." After he left, the house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, though. Clean, like it had finally exhaled with me. That evening, Marcus stopped by one of my old army friends. He'd heard about the story and decided to check in. "You made the news," he said, stepping inside with that half-smirk soldiers use when something's both impressive and a little terrifying. "You always did know how to hit hard." "I didn't hit," I said. "They just tripped over the truth." He chuckled, sitting across from me. "Still poetic, even when you're pissed." "I'm not pissed," I said. "I'm done." He studied me for a moment. "You know, most people spend their lives trying to make their parents proud." "Yeah," I said. "I stopped doing that when they taught me what pride really costs." He nodded, like he got it. "So what now?" I glanced toward Mason's photo on the mantel. "Now I build something that lasts." Marcus leaned back. "You're talking literal or metaphorical?" "Both," I said. He grinned. "Figures. You were always the one who turned pain into a project." When he left, I stood at the window watching the streetlights flicker on. The world outside looked ordinary again. But inside, everything had shifted. Before bed, I went into the living room and pulled out the old family photo albums one more time. Page after page of smiling faces that didn't mean what they used to. I tore out one picture, the last family Christmas we'd had together. Mason was holding a gift, laughing. My parents were standing behind him, all staged warmth and fake smiles. I folded the photo, carefully cutting the line where their hands rested on his shoulders. I set their half in the fireplace and watched it burn. The paper curled fast, the edges blackening before disintegrating into ash. Mason's half I kept. I tucked it into the frame beside my bed. The flames crackled softly, lighting the room with that orange glow only fire can make. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt stillness. The phone buzzed on the counter. Another call from Mom. I didn't pick up. I watched it ring, then fade to silence. When the screen went dark, I turned away, finished my drink, and blew out the candle beside me. The house smelled faintly of smoke and bourbon, two things that never mix well, but somehow fit the mood perfectly. Outside, the wind had died down. The world was calm again. I sat back in the chair, looking at Mason's photo one more time. "We're okay," I said quietly. Finally. Then I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the quiet fill every corner of the house. The smell of sawdust hit me before the memories did. It was faint, mixed with oil and the sweet scent of pine. The old shed behind the house hadn't been opened in years, not since Mason and I used it to build his first birdhouse. The walls were lined with tools, some rusted, some still sharp. His small hammer hung on the same nail where he'd left it, too light for real work but too heavy to throw away. I pulled the dust cover off the workbench and ran my hand over the wood. It was rough, uneven, like everything in my life lately, but it was solid, real, and I needed something real. The morning after Marcus visited, I'd gone online and registered a name. The Mason Tyler Workshop. Mason's middle name had been Tyler, though few people knew it. The idea wasn't fully formed when I started it. It never is, but I knew the goal. Build a place for kids like him, the quiet ones, the ones who fix things instead of talking about them. By the end of the week, I'd filed the paperwork for the nonprofit and cleared out the shed. I didn't have a plan beyond that, but I had my hands, my training, and a lifetime's worth of stubbornness. That was enough. When Tyler stopped by again, I handed him a pair of gloves. "You're helping," I said. He grinned. "Helping what?" I pointed to the bench. "Building something worth sticking around for." End of 1. We started small, repairing the broken shelves, sanding down the warped boards, replacing the light fixtures. Tyler worked quietly, methodically. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it mattered. "Mason would have liked this," he said once, brushing sawdust off his hands. "Yeah," I said. "He would have bossed us both around." That made him laugh, and for the first time in a long while, the sound didn't sting. A week later, I put up a small sign out front: Community Workshop. Open Saturdays. No sponsors, no donations yet. Just me, some borrowed tools, and whoever decided to show up. The first morning, 2 kids came, brothers, maybe 10 and 12. Their mom said they'd been acting out since their dad got deployed. "They need something to do," she said. "Something that doesn't involve screens." I nodded. "We can handle that." They built a simple toolbox that day. Crooked, uneven, but theirs. When they finished, the younger one held it up proudly. "Can we come back next week?" "Only if you promise not to build anything explosive," I said. They grinned. No promises. Word spread faster than I expected. Within a month, the shed turned into a proper workspace. We had donated tools, scrap lumber from a local carpenter, and a few volunteers, mostly veterans, who understood the therapy in keeping your hands busy. The rhythm came back to me easily. The sound of hammers, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the quiet concentration, it was almost like being back in the field, except this time, no one was shooting at me. One afternoon, I was showing the older kids how to measure a joint cut when a familiar car pulled up out front. My stomach tightened before I even looked. My mother stepped out, slow and careful, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. The kids noticed but kept working. I walked outside, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You lost?" She shook her head. "I heard you started something here." "Word travels," I said flatly. She glanced toward the shed. "It's nice." "It's not for you," I said. "I didn't say it was," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "I just wanted to see it." Her eyes were red, not from crying, more from exhaustion. I wondered if she'd been sleeping at all. "You've done well," she said. "Your father would be proud." I raised an eyebrow. He could say that himself if he felt it. End quote. She looked down at her hands. "He's been struggling. Tell him to take a number." She nodded slightly, as if she'd expected that. "I didn't come to fight, Danny." "Then why are you here?" "To understand," she said softly. "You always said actions matter more than words. I'm here. That's my action." It was the first thing she'd said that didn't sound rehearsed. For a moment, I saw the woman she used to be, the one who used to wait for my letters when I was overseas, who'd send cookies even though half the box would arrive as crumbs. But the feeling didn't last. "You came too late," I said, not harshly, just honestly. "You can't make up for absence with presence." She swallowed hard, nodded once, and turned back toward the car. Before she left, she said quietly, "You got that fire from me, you know. I just forgot how to use mine." I didn't answer. She drove away, and I went back inside. The kids were still working, oblivious to the emotional wreckage outside. One of them held up a crooked chair. "Does this look straight to you, Miss Danny?" I tilted my head. "If you squint hard enough." They laughed. I laughed too. It felt real. That night, after locking up, I sat at the workbench and pulled out the half-finished project Mason and I had started before he passed a small wooden bench. He'd wanted to give it to his grandparents for Christmas. I'd told him we'd finish it next weekend. That weekend never came. I sanded the last edge and drove in the final screw. Then, without planning to, I took one of my unit's challenge coins from my pocket, a small, worn token that had followed me through 3 tours, and embedded it under the seat. Tyler came in right as I was wiping the dust off. "Looks good," he said. "It's his," I said quietly. "The last thing we built together." He ran his hand along the wood. "You gonna keep it here?" "Yeah," I said. "It belongs here." We moved it to the corner near the door, the coin hidden, but there, like an anchor. A few days later, one of the local news outlets stopped by. A reporter asked for an interview, curious about the soldier who turned grief into something tangible. I agreed, mostly because it wasn't about fame, it was about purpose. When the article ran, donations started coming in. Small amounts at first, then more. Notes from strangers. For the kids. For Mason. For you. Every nail I hammered, every board I cut, every chair the kids built, it all felt like stitching a wound shut. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but steadily. By the end of the month, the shed had become a real workshop painted white, with big windows and a new sign carved by the kids themselves. The letters weren't straight, but they were strong. When I locked up that evening, I looked at the bench again. The coin glinted faintly in the light. Mason's ghost didn't haunt me anymore. He lingered, sure, but gently like air after rain. I turned off the lights, closed the door, and for the first time since his funeral, I didn't feel like I was leaving him behind. I was building forward, and somehow, he was still part of it. The first envelope arrived on a Thursday. I almost threw it out with the grocery ads, but the handwriting stopped me. My mother's elegant, practiced, the kind she used on Christmas cards and apology notes that never said much of anything. I turned it over twice before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, something floral that used to fill our house when I was a kid. The letter started with my full name, of course. Danielle, not Danny. She only used my nickname when she was trying to seem warm. Your father and I saw the article about the workshop. It's wonderful what you've done in Mason's name. We've both been praying for you. I stopped reading there. The rest of the paragraph probably listed all the ways they'd been supportive in spirit. I skimmed further down, and the real purpose revealed itself. We'd like to make a contribution to the fund in Mason's memory. Perhaps we can rebuild the family image together. People have been asking questions. That line made me laugh out loud. Not the joyful kind, more the bitter, sharp kind that doesn't sound like humor at all. Family image, not family love, not family connection, image. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and set it beside my coffee mug. The next morning, I found another envelope this time, from Lily. Hers was typed, of course, printed on her studio's stationery, even though the studio had been closed for weeks. Danny, I know things got out of hand, and I know you're angry, but we could work together on something good out of this. Maybe a photo series, something about healing, loss, and strength. We could call it Family Reclaimed. It could help both of us. I put that letter straight into the shredder. By noon, I'd had enough. I walked to my desk, pulled out a blank piece of paper, and wrote a reply. Not to Lily, she wasn't worth ink, but to my parents. Mom and Dad, I got your letter. You don't need to rebuild any image. You need to live with the one you created. Mason didn't need flowers or donations. He needed people who showed up. You failed him. You failed me. You don't fix that with money. You fix it with silence and a little self-awareness. Don't contact me again. The workshop is his. It's pure, and it's staying that way. You can tell people whatever story you need to sleep at night. I've stopped caring which version you pick. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't sign it at all. Just Danny. I sealed the envelope, left it on the counter, and stared at it for a long time. Sending it wouldn't undo anything, but it would draw a line. Maybe that's what I needed most, a final line between what was and what would never be again. That afternoon, Thomas, my lawyer, stopped by the workshop. He'd been helping with some of the paperwork for the nonprofit, and he brought a checkbook for donations. He was one of those old-school types who still wore suits to casual meetings. He looked around the workshop, nodding approvingly. You've done good work here, Danny. It feels alive. It's honest, I said. That's close enough. He smiled faintly. Your parents reached out to my office, you know. I leaned against the workbench. Let me guess they want to make a philanthropic contribution. He raised an eyebrow. You already knew. They sent a letter. I shredded it. He exhaled slowly. I can hold off any formal offers, but I have to ask, do you ever see reconciliation as possible? Reconciliation isn't a goal, I said. Pieces. They're not the same thing. He nodded. Fair enough. He lingered another minute, glancing at the projects scattered around. You know, he said, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen people try to fix the past with lawsuits, money, even new families. None of it works. But this, he gestured toward the workshop. This is rare. You built something instead of burning everything down. I smirked. You didn't see me with a lighter a few months ago. He laughed, then left me with a folder of paperwork and a quiet kind of approval that didn't need words. As the day wound down, the kids started leaving one by one. The last to go was Chloe, a teenage volunteer who came every Saturday. She lingered by the door, hesitant. "My mom saw your interview," she said finally. She cried. She said it reminded her of my uncle. I smiled softly. "He in the service?" "Yeah," she said. "Didn't come back the same." I nodded. "Most of us don't." She fiddled with the strap of her backpack. "You think people get what they deserve? Like karma or whatever?" I thought for a moment. "Not always," I said. "But sometimes people end up facing exactly what they ran from. That's close enough." She seemed to like that answer. "See you Saturday," she said, and left. After she was gone, I sat on the bench Mason, and I had finished the one with the coin hidden underneath. The room smelled of varnish and rain, the kind of scent that makes time feel slower. I opened the drawer under the workbench and took out another letter. This one was older, folded, and creased at the edges. The last letter Mason ever wrote. I'd found it weeks ago in one of his notebooks, but hadn't been able to read it until now. "Hey, Mom," it started, the handwriting messy but unmistakably his. "If you're reading this, I probably didn't get to say goodbye. Don't be sad too long, okay? You always told me that love doesn't die, it just changes jobs. So I'll still be around, just doing mine from somewhere else." I blinked hard, but the words kept swimming. "Tell Grandpa and Grandma I forgive them, even if they don't ask for it. They're scared of losing control. Don't hate them for it. Just don't let them control you either. And tell Aunt Lily she should stop talking so much." I laughed at that part, a real ugly laugh that cracked through the quiet. "Love them anyway," the last line read. That one stayed with me. Love them anyway. I folded the letter carefully, set it back in the drawer, and leaned back. Maybe Mason had been smarter than all of us. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about freeing them. Maybe it was about freeing myself. The next day, I mailed my letter to my parents not out of spite, but to close the circle. I didn't include a return address. When I came back to the workshop, the sunlight was pouring through the open door, dust dancing in the air. I looked at the projects, lined up the benches, the shelves, the half-built boats, and thought, this is what survival looks like. Not noise, not apology, just work, hands, wood, progress, and maybe, just maybe, a little forgiveness hiding between the grains. The letter from the Department of the Army arrived folded between 2 donation receipts. I didn't notice it at first. Thought it was another form for tax records. The envelope was plain government-grade beige, the kind you could spot a mile away. I tore it open over my morning coffee, half expecting it to be a survey or a benefits update. Instead, it started with, "In recognition of your service and continued contribution to the veteran community." I read it twice before the meaning sank in. They were commending the workshop, officially. Someone, maybe one of the parents, maybe a soldier I'd trained, had nominated me for a Community Valor Award. I didn't even know such a thing existed. The ceremony was optional, but the letter said the acknowledgement would go on record. I folded it neatly and set it on the table beside Mason's photo. He was smiling in that picture, wearing my old dog tags like they were medals. That morning, the kids trickled into the workshop as usual. Tyler came first, carrying a box of nails. "Got these from the hardware store," he said. "The owner gave us a discount after reading the article." "See?" I said, taking the box from him. "You hang around a soldier long enough, you start winning wars with coupons." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're something else, Miss Danny." We started working on the new project, a bookshelf for the community library. The room filled with the rhythm of saws and sandpaper, the sound of purpose. Outside, the sun hit the windows just right, turning the dust into gold. Around noon, Chloe arrived with her mom. The woman looked nervous, holding a small potted plant. "We wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you're doing here. Chloe talks about this place non-stop." I smiled. "She's a hard worker. She makes the tools earn their keep." Her mom laughed. "It's the first thing that's made her smile in months." I took the plant, a small fern, and set it on the shelf. "Then it belongs here." The day moved like that, quiet but full. No tension, no ghosts, just the hum of ordinary life done right. When everyone left, I sat at the workbench, sorting through donation letters. Most were small checks, a few kind notes. Then one envelope caught my eye. It didn't have a return address. Inside was a typed note on plain white paper. For the workshop. We're proud of what you've built. Anonymous. There was a cashier's check folded inside. $10,000. I stared at it for a long time. Only one person in this town would call themselves anonymous out of guilt. My mother. I didn't cash it. I didn't rip it up either. I slid it into a drawer with Mason's letter, and the others things too complicated to destroy but too heavy to display. That night, Marcus dropped by. He brought pizza, as if that excused the way he walked in without knocking. You've got a fan club, he said, waving a printed article. They're calling you the soldier who builds peace. I snorted. That's cute. Makes me sound like I know what peace looks like. You do, he said. You're living it. I shook my head. Peace isn't quiet, Marcus. It's just not loud enough for other people to hear. He leaned against the counter, eyeing me like he always did when he thought I was too philosophical for my own good. You ever gonna go to that award thing? No, I said. Ceremonies are for the people who didn't show up when it mattered. He nodded. Fair. We ate in silence for a while. Then he said, You know, I used to think you were hard to read. Turns out, you're just honest in a world that isn't. I smirked. That's the nicest insult I've heard all week. When he left, I cleaned up, turned off the lights, and walked outside. The night was cool, the kind that carries every sound, the distant hum of traffic, crickets, a dog barking 2 blocks away. Across the street, I saw a figure standing by the fence. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then the porch light hit her face. My mother. She wasn't holding anything. Not flowers or envelopes this time. Just standing there, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. She didn't move closer. I didn't either. For a moment, neither of us said a word. The silence was different. Not hostile, just fragile. She finally spoke, her voice barely reaching across the street. It's beautiful what you've made here. I nodded once. It's his. She swallowed. I know. We stayed like that for another minute. 2 silhouettes connected by something too broken to name. Then she nodded slightly, turned, and walked away. I didn't stop her. The next morning, Chloe came in early. My grandma said she saw your mom last night, she said. Said she was standing outside the workshop for a long time. I kept sanding the wooden plank in front of me. Yeah. She stopped by. 1. Did you talk to her? Not really. Do you think she'll come back? I looked at the plank, the smooth line of grain running under my palm. Maybe. Some people can only watch from a distance. That afternoon, while cleaning up, I found the award letter again. I'd shoved it under a pile of project plans. I unfolded it and read it one more time. The words didn't mean much, but the idea did. Recognition wasn't the goal. It never had been. But if Mason's name was being spoken in rooms full of uniforms and flags, then maybe that was enough. A few days later, the mail brought another envelope, this one from a local high school. Inside was a handwritten letter from the shop teacher. We've been following your story. Our students would love to visit your workshop. They're interested in woodworking and hearing from someone who served. I smiled at that. The thought of teenagers swinging hammers unsupervised sounded like chaos, but the good kind. The following Saturday, the shop was busier than ever. Laughter bounced off the walls. The kids built birdhouses, benches, and one overly ambitious attempt at a rocking chair that wobbled like a drunk sailor. I didn't fix it. I told them to figure it out together. While they worked, I stepped outside for some air. The sun was low, spilling gold over everything. The wind carried the smell of sawdust and sweat and youth. It smelled like life. Tyler came out a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag. You ever think about what Mason would say if he saw all this? I looked out at the shed full of laughter. Yeah, I said softly. He'd probably tell me to stop micromanaging. Tyler grinned. Sounds about right. I leaned against the porch rail, eyes on the sky. It was turning orange, then pink, then that deep purple you only see right before night really takes over. Sometimes peace doesn't show up with fanfare or applause. It just slides quietly into your life when you've stopped looking for it. Inside, Someone yelled that the chair finally balanced. Everyone cheered. I laughed under my breath, the sound small but steady. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel like something I had to survive. It felt like something I could finally live in. The workshop smelled like cedar and coffee that morning, a mix that somehow felt like home. The winter sun was sharp, cutting through the frosted windows and catching on the dust floating in the air. Tyler was already out front, hammering the new porch railing while whistling off-key. I stood in the doorway with a mug in hand, watching him work. "You missed a spot," I said. He didn't look up. "You said this thing should lean a little left, right?" I laughed. "Only because everything in this family does." He grinned, the kind that reminded me why I started all this in the first place. Inside, the heater hummed softly. On the table lay a stack of letters, some from parents thanking me, some from kids who'd moved away but still sent updates about school or new jobs. One of them was from a boy named Aaron who used to build toy cars here. He wrote, "I joined the Navy. Thought Mason would think that's cool." I set the letter down and breathed in slow. Mason would have thought it was more than cool. He would have asked 100 questions about ships, gear, and whether the food was any better than ours in the field. Tyler came in shaking snow off his boots. "Porch is done. That railing's not going anywhere." "Neither am I said. He raised an eyebrow. That sounded dramatic. "You good?" "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. "Better than I've been in years." "I do." He started unpacking wood planks for the next project, a storage chest for the front corner. The sound of the saw filled the room again, steady, grounding. It was a rhythm I could live inside. Then the phone rang. The landline, not my cell. Only a handful of people had that number. I picked it up without thinking. Danny speaking. "Miss Collins, this is Officer Latham from the State Department. I'm calling about your parents." My grip tightened on the receiver. "What about them?" "There was an accident on I-84 this morning. They were en route to a church event. I'm sorry they didn't make it." For a second, I didn't say anything. The room went silent except for the faint buzz of the line. Tyler looked up from the bench, confused by the expression on my face. The officer continued. "They listed you as next of kin. We'll need you to confirm arrangements." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. "Send the details to my email," I said, my voice flat but steady. "Thank you for calling." I hung up. The sound felt final. Tyler was still watching. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just family news." He hesitated, but he didn't press. "Good kid." I went outside for air. The cold bit at my skin, but it helped. The world looked painfully normal. Mail truck passing by, kids laughing down the street, wind stirring the last of the brown leaves. I thought I'd feel relief, maybe even satisfaction. But all I felt was quiet. Not peace, not grief, just stillness. I stayed outside until my fingers went numb. When I went back in, the workshop lights glowed warm against the darkening sky. The kids' projects, the benches, the smell of pine, it all looked the same. But something in me had shifted. The war was over, and there was no one left to fight. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, staring at a blank page. For once, I didn't know who the letter was for. Maybe Mason. Maybe myself. Maybe the silence. I finally wrote, "I thought closure would feel bigger. It doesn't. It just feels like breathing without counting." Then I set the pen down. A week later, I attended the small service arranged by the church. It wasn't public. Just a handful of people, a pastor who barely knew them, and 2 closed coffins. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there, hands folded, letting the cold wind sting my face. Afterward, the pastor approached me gently. "Would you like to say a few words, Miss Collins?" I shook my head. "No need. I already said everything worth saying." He nodded, perhaps understanding more than he showed. When it was over, I left a single rose on each coffin, not out of forgiveness, not out of obligation, just respect for the fact that they existed, and that their story, however flawed, had shaped mine. Driving home, the sun broke through the clouds, cutting gold over the road. It wasn't symbolic, it was just weather. But still, it felt right. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Tyler out front, working on a new sign for the workshop. The old one had started to fade. This one was simple hand-carved letters that read, "The Mason Tyler Workshop, built to last." I smiled. "You misspelled workshop." He looked up, smirking. "I know. Makes it authentic." And, inside, the kids were already gathering for the day's projects. Laughter, sawdust, chatter it all, swirled together like a heartbeat. Chloe waved from the back. "Hey, Miss Danny, we're out of paint again." I reached for the supply shelf. "Then we'll make do. That's what soldiers do." The kids cheered like I'd just declared a holiday. Later that evening, after they'd all gone home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The world outside was quiet. Snow had started to fall again, covering everything in white. I thought about Mason, my parents, the years I'd spent trying to hold a family together that didn't want to be held. And somehow, for the first time, I felt no bitterness in that thought, just acceptance. The knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, there was no one there, just a small brown envelope on the porch. Inside was a photo of the workshop, printed from the local paper. On the back, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. "We saw. Sorry." I didn't need a signature. I knew it was from my mother, written before the accident. I pressed the paper flat, stared at it for a long time, then placed it under Mason's photo on the mantel. The next morning, I walked out to the yard. The air was bright and cold, the kind that wakes you up completely. The new sign gleamed in the light. I could almost hear Mason's voice in my head teasing, soft, alive. "Looks good, Mom. Don't forget to teach them the pancake trick." I smiled, tears threatening but never quite falling. "Yeah, kid, I won't." Tyler arrived with 2 bags of flour. "You making pancakes again?" "Yeah," I said. "We've got a lot to celebrate." He looked around, confused. "What are we celebrating?" "Peace," I said simply. "Finally having it." We cooked together, laughing at burnt edges and crooked flips. The smell of butter filled the air, warm and familiar. Later, when the kids showed up, I handed out plates and told them Mason's old rule. The first one's always ugly. Eat it anyway, it's good luck. They laughed, dug in, and for a moment, the world was perfect in its imperfection. The snow kept falling outside, steady and soft, wrapping the workshop in silence. I looked around the room at the laughter, the life, the light, and thought, this is it. Not revenge, not redemption, just peace. And this time, it was mine to keep.